All right, cool. I'm here today with Walt Bismarck, the Substack extraordinaire. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things. But look, I'm going to post this on Substack. I think everyone on Substack will already know who he is. But I'm also going to post it on my YouTube. And honestly, I don't think many people on YouTube will actually have heard of you. So I thought you might just begin. Actually, you know what? I'm going to introduce you. I came across you because of your like viral article where you basically talked about how you left behind white nationalism. And it was a funny story because you moved to Nebraska, you start living around white people, you're in a homogenous society, and then you suddenly realize, hang on a second, I don't know if I want the whole world, I don't know if I want all of America to be like this. So anyway, maybe just start by recounting that story.
Yeah. So, I guess I'll preface this by kind of saying like where I came from because it's funny you mentioned people on YouTube probably won't have heard of me because I used to be way bigger on YouTube than I am on Substack right now. I used to have like 50,000 subs, but I got completely wiped out in 2018, I think it was. I had been deplatformed on Twitter in like 2017. I was a pretty major alt-right kind of figure for a lot of that time, but I got deplatformed on Twitter like right before Charlottesville. My YouTube kind of like I hadn't really been making content on YouTube. And by the way, for those of you who haven't heard of me, back in the day, I did Disney parodies essentially. They're pretty highbrow, but like they're very like sort of dense with memes. And I think they did a pretty effective job at sort of conveying dissident right, or I guess it was alt-right, not dissident right back then. Alt-right ideas throughout like the broader kind of cultural space. Like some of the videos that were kind of more normally friendly got a few million views, so they were pretty influential. But so I got knocked off in 2018 of YouTube, and I was sort of I guess like just I guess listless because I didn't have any. I guess like my identity was really coming from my participation in the alt-right, right? So I sort of at that point I was sort of thinking, this was when things were transitioning to the dissident right. It was right after Charlottesville. I became like a tradcath for a brief time, and I was thinking like I wanted to form like a white nationalist cell in like in a homogeneous area of the country that I figured would be like very easy to organize people because everybody was because like there was a demographic supermajority of white people there. The thing is, like, I think like if I had thought about it a bit more rigorously, I probably could have concluded. I mean, like, because even at the time we knew that like a lot of those states in the Great Plains region had voted for Ted Cruz over Trump in the primary, right? So like that should have been sort of an indication that they don't necessarily have that same kind of like waiting group sentiment that they might be sort of more animated by, I guess, kind of that traditional ideological conservatism. But I guess I maybe was ignoring that, or I just kind of wanted to put a positive spin on things. And I guess I sort of figured because I was able to establish myself as a leader in the alt-right and the sort of like online transgressive intellectual space that I'd be able to like form, like a cell in Nebraska, and I could become like a sort of like, maybe I can get elected to Congress eventually. I could become a successful businessman. I had all these sort of like stupid ideas. Anyway, when I got there, so I lived in Omaha, and I sort of a lot of people kind of got the impression that I was in like a very like sort of rural locale, but it was really, I mean, like a lot of the people, I was actually good friends with a guy who grew up on a farm, and he thought of Omaha as like the big city, right? So it was a suburban area. I mean, or maybe you could call it sort of like exurban because it was kind of on the outskirts of Omaha, but it wasn't I guess like really the sticks. But a lot of and the people I was around, like it wasn't necessarily that they were like when I call them hobbits, I think is the term I use in my article that would inflamed a lot of passions. That wasn't necessarily about like them being stupid or them being even unsophisticated, because a lot of them were quite educated people, right? Like these, I mean, they're mostly college educated people I was kind of, surrounding myself with. It was, and you and I were talking about this, before the show, they were quite low in trade openness. They just weren't, and you can even like look at maps of the US and you see like the geographic distribution of different traits. Like the Great Plains region is one of like these like deserts of openness where it happens to be quite low. And, like most of the people are descended from, like German immigrants, or I guess like you had some Anglo immigration there too, but it tends to be primarily like Teutonic immigration, people who came, following the Homestead Act. And some people have actually made the interesting point. There's a guy, VB Knives on Twitter, who is kind of a major DR account, has kind of made this point that a lot of these German communities in the Midwest are actually one of the least assimilated into American culture of all. Like you sort of think of them as quintessentially American in certain ways, but in other respects, they're actually kind of like the least, in the sense that they tend to be quite, I don't know if collectivist is the right word, but there's an extreme conformity, right? They tend to sort of socially disincentivized, like sticking your nose out, or it's a sort of tall poppy syndrome, right? Or janteloven is called in Scandinavia. It's like a sort of discouraging of being sort of transgressive, of wanting to, like go along to get along. There's also a certain like gossipiness where people will be very, very nice to your face, incredibly nice, but then, like you'll find out later they were like shit talking you the entire time, right? And that's sort of how, and people in these communities, they perceive that as a way of protecting themselves and keeping out outsiders who might be malevolent. And, that's how people who read the article sort of reacted to me. And I guess like I sort of did, and this is something people even sort of commented on. A lot of people come into these sort of communities, or they'll, come in from a faster part of the country, and they'll sort of think that they'll naturally be a leader and that they'll be able to sort of dominate everyone, and then they'll find that they're just sort of socially ostracized. I mean, yeah, like I think there was an extent. I was a very young guy. I was like 24 at the time. I kind of just, I was a hotshot kid, kind of thinking I was going to be able to do this. And I found that like the other young guys around me, who I thought I'd be able to turn into like white nationalists, they, even the smart ones, like they cared about like Bitcoin, right? They cared about, like stuff like index funds and like learning about, they really like respected like Dave Ramsey, right? That was the sort of temperament. And very high conscientiousness people. Some of them had grown up on farms. Some of them were just suburbanites. But I mean, it just, I found it was completely sort of antithetical to where I was going. And the thing is, like, I actually succeeded there professionally. And it wasn't like I was totally ostracized. Like I did find women there who I could date. I did, it wasn't like terrible, but it just wasn't, like generally speaking, the social opportunities just weren't what they were in Florida. And I think I just learned that I need somewhere that's like a lot of the things that I sort of wanted, I wanted in a place to live, like being kind of low crime, being very affordable, being sort of stable and conservative and everything like that. Like it actually makes things kind of unpleasant for somebody like me, somebody who is like temperamentally high openness, who just has this sort of like aggressive disposition, maybe more entrepreneurial, lower agreeableness and such. And yeah, I mean, like I think having like higher extremes of like wealth inequality, having less of a sort of like impetus for social egalitarianism. Like one of the things I really hated was like my bosses would performatively come in and they would like mow the lawn in front of everybody, and everybody would be like, oh, like look at the boss mowing the lawn. He's so like down to earth. But he would like pay people less, and he could get away with paying people less because he would like mow the lawn or bring in beer for everybody. And that would like impress them. And it's like, like say what you will about like Jews or whatever, but like I've never had like Jews have actually always kind of paid me pretty well. Like they'll be like a dick to you, but like they're not going to like, like you can just negotiate in a very transactional way and it's not perceived as dishonorable. Whereas I found that the sort of plains Teuton, in a lot of these WASP communities, they'll view it as kind of shifty or dishonorable or, gauche. If you talk about power dynamics or status, or if you talk about, if you just talk Turkey, right? Whereas like I found that like Jews or Italians or Cubans or whatever in Florida, like they just won't do that. So I found it wasn't really for me. And I think that growing up in the Sun Belt, I mean, like, I grew up in Arizona and then I moved to Florida when I was, fairly young. So it's like both of these regions are very fastly expanding. Like it's sort of just, it's also just like everybody, like nobody in Arizona is like from Arizona. Cause it's like, they only invented air conditioning in like the 60s and 70s, right? So like before then it was like a bunch of like Indians and like some cowboys, but nobody else would have lived in Arizona. Same thing with Florida. It's like it was for much of like Florida is actually like the kind of the new frontier in a lot of ways, in the sense that like before you had a lot of technology to like drain a lot of these swamps or again air conditioning. It was a very sparsely populated state, and you started getting a lot of mass settlement in the 20th century, the mid 20th century. So it's like both of these regions have there isn't this culture of like, oh, you're from here. Like this whole idea of like, oh, you need to be from here, we're not going to trust you. Like that seems to me like almost un-American. But I think it's because like for me, like my family history has always been like moving around, like to where the jobs are, where the money is. And like that just seems like kind of obvious to me. Whereas like in Nebraska, there was a sort of culture of like a lot of people are like, why would you move to Nebraska? Like they even had that attitude, like, well, like people don't like move here. Like why? Like they were suspicious of me for that reason. And they were right to be, probably, because it was weird what I was doing. It was like it wasn't a normal thing. It was kind of me being a weird autiste. And I belong in Florida. I'm obviously a Florida man, right? It's like so obvious. So I mean, it worked out for the best. And it's not like I hate Nebraska, but I guess I do just and I still have friends from back there, right? It is just I guess like the way I was contextualizing it in the article was that I feel like the things about white people that I like are, and this is maybe, it kind of gets into the Faustian thing that, you and I might have attention over. The things about white people I like are like, honestly, like the things that are like almost most characteristic of Jews. right? It's like I sort of think of whites in relation to like Asians, like we're like verbal, whereas like Asians are mathematical, right? Like they memorize things, whereas we're sort of creative. We're sort of like spontaneous, we're disruptive, we break things apart, right? Whereas I think a lot of these people in Nebraska, they might be like Germans or WASPs who like they think of like whiteness to the extent that they do at all, right? Like because a lot of them, but like Midwestern white nationalists like hate the way I talk about whiteness because they think about whiteness as like being like German, right? And like having the temperament of like an engineer. Whereas like for me, I think a bit of having the kind of temperament of like the Jew, which is like sort of like creative and destructive and like in equal measure, right? Because creation and destruction go together, whereas it's kind of stasis that I think you get from the Midwestern Teuton. So I don't know. I rambled a lot. Hopefully I was somewhat coherent there, but I guess my thing was I was contextualizing in terms of the Faustian spirit. I saw it as like the sort of attitude of the Sun Belt that I grew up in is like you take a lot of risks, you move around, you don't form like deep attachments to like a plot of dirt. Like America's so big, America's so transient, right? Like that's just like not what America's about. Like you should be entrepreneurial, you should be, innovative and willing to like break social convention. And I saw them as like un-American in a sense, and I saw them as anti-white. I saw them as like Asians in a sense, but I have a more sophisticated take on that now, and I realize there's like different like shades of whiteness. There's different different cultures that you like within the spectrum of our of our people or whatever that have like express characteristics in different ways. But I think that the Celtic temperament is similar to the Jewish temperament in certain ways, and like part of that is hyperverbal swagger, part of that is kind of bullshitting, part of that is manipulating climbing your way up the cracks of the wall through life, and I think that's what I identify with. So that's why I think of myself as, I identify strongly with Florida, and I identify with like the sort of Faustian spirit, and it's why I become sort of more philo-Semitic too. So, sorry, I just rambled a bunch, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, but one of the main points that you make in that article, right, is that if you're like if you look at the alt-right, if you look at the dissident right, you notice that these people disproportionately are actually not from conventionally conservative homes, right? Often they're actually from these blue states, or they're from very progressive cities. And effectively what's happened is these people, because they are so high openness, have been able to actually notice that the sort of progressive, quote unquote, open ideology is in fact quite insular. And if you get out of it, there's different ways of thinking. So basically the point that I'm trying to get at is a lot of people in these circles, these far right circles, are in fact high openness. It takes a degree of high openness to get there in the first place, right? And your point was a common recommendation that people get is like move away from the city. And your point was, if you're a high openness guy who's interested in ideas and you move to a place like Nebraska, you're going to be miserable. Yeah.
Well, no, the funny thing about that is like, I think that was very true of the alt-right, but I don't know if it's true of the dissident right? I mean, it's true of like the DR people on Substack. Like even the ones who are more like tradcons are the ones who are more, who have the more sort of DR ethos. Like they do tend to be high openness people who will like, they won't just call me a Michelin faggot, but like if I go on Twitter, that's like all I get, right? Is like I just get people calling me a theater kid, I get people calling me cringe, people just really, I think the alt-right was a victim of its own success. And I think we let in too many sort of chuddish people into the movement. And I say like let in, I mean, like I was encouraging it. I was one of the people who brought in some of the most people, right? So I'm not gonna like, I love the attention. I love the aplomb or whatever. And I sort of, suffered from audience capture in many ways. My content became less sophisticated, the longer I, fell into that. So I'm not gonna act like it was, I was innocent in this, but like, I think that sort of happened. And, with the dissident right, what was Charlottesville, basically all the lingering like weirdness, like the theater kid energy, the theatricality, the provocation, the high openness culture, it got kind of purged from the movement, I think. And I think that like, to the extent that like, I think a lot of like DR people who are still around from the alt-right, they play down their high openness, they play down their theater kid elements, and they themselves are audience captured by like their own, audiences. Like I just get the perception that culture of the alt-right of being very provocative and fun and sort of, like playing with ideas, playing with identities, like being able to be transgressive, like that sort of died. So I guess like to your point though, to that sort of guy, like it's better to like stay
Oh,
in.
wait, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah,
Because
go
I
ahead. Yeah,
actually want to point out that I think that is a misinterpretation, because I think that effectively what happened to the alt-right happened to the dissident right. So me personally, like I'm, I guess, a latecomer, right? So I was on Frog Twitter in 2020. For me, that's people like that. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
it did have this exuberant joy de vivre kind of quality to it. And what's happened, probably starting in 2022, I would say, maybe 2023, it did begin to take on this dour and, dare I say, toxic quality where, like, I can't spend time on Twitter now. Like, I'll occasionally go on just to maybe share something that I've put out. But I did notice those like chuddish, and just like very low IQ very low IQ anti-Semitism has come to basically characterize the space. And you go on and it's just like it's like gore porn and yeah, and then low IQ anti-Semitism. But that is not what it was always like. So I think that perhaps your characterization of the dissident right is more a feature of like when you kind of began to engage with the space again. Like you were kind of
yeah.
coming in when it was declining. But anyway, yeah, go on with what you said.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think true to it's also like sort of you know, it's weird because I talked to Kashuda and she was kind of like framing things similarly because I think she came in around the same time that you did. And like she sort of had the perception of things being like fun and exciting, like around like the beginning of it. And she's kind of gotten disillusioned with the DR for the same reasons that, you know, I have. But like, I guess sort of the way I look at it is, yeah, I mean, I guess because I left after Charlottesville, maybe there was like a little renaissance like after Charlottesville, like between the, you know, like in like 2018 to 2021, like before things got like really bad with COVID and everything that I sort of missed out on just because I wasn't. Well, I mean, like part of the problem is like I tried to come back to Twitter a few times, but I was just like banned like right away. Like they were so aggressive about banning me, and like I couldn't ever like recreate. Like I lost all my friends, you know. So it's like I sort of like there's a sense in which I'm not really plugged into the DR. So maybe you can, you know, like there are probably certain things I don't understand about it, and I might, you know, misinterpret because there are just certain aspects of the subculture that I sort of miss. But I guess like something I will say is that I feel like the alt right was more it was big tent, but it also felt like more of like a common thing, whereas the dissident right feels very diffuse, and it feels like there's so many different elements within it that sort of like oftentimes hate each other, or oftentimes are just existing in totally different spaces. But like I do know like there are a few things that I like commonalities that I don't like. Like there seems to be like this common element of like calling people like grifter. You know, like if there's any sort of like entrepreneurial activity, there seems to be a sort of distaste and distrust for any kind of like flamboyance or performativity or theatricality, which like definitely wasn't the case in the alt-right. I mean, Richard Spencer was the ultimate theater kid. You know, so I mean, I guess I don't know how much that was the case in 2020. Like what I will say though is that I feel like a lot of the tradcast sort of elements and a lot of the sort of like NRX kind of adjacent elements, like that seems to like have a lot of emphasis on like elite theory and just aesthetically this idea of like being a serious person, which I don't know, like to me, I think that's kind of like silly. Like I kind of think that's like, you know, like unless you're like directly running for officers. I mean, I think that oftentimes you can engage with people most effectively using humor and by playing with irony and by playing with these things. But I think that there's I don't know, like a certain like among the more serious people in the DR, there's maybe sometimes a certain you know, desire to be more sort of scholarly. I don't know. I don't know if like any of this is even like true. I'm just
No,
gonna say
no. It is true. I think what happened was people recognized, and I myself did this, right? Is people recognized that well, I think you got to recognize that censorship was so intense that the only way you could really get around it was by adopting a sort of scholarly persona. Because I realized like the things they really crack down on is like jokes. They really don't like comedic material, but you can really say whatever you like, provided you pitch it at like a university lecture level, right? They don't care. And that's one of the things that, for better and worse, actually, like censorship brought that about. People had to adopt a sort of scholarly tone in a way to avoid censorship, because I know that there were other people who did this, but generally speaking, I feel like that's not what gets the eye of Sauron on you. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because it's not as effective in terms of getting people. I mean, if you look at like how many people watch my videos back in the day compared to versus how many people would watch like a, you know, like a lecture from like AmRen or MPI. I mean, like it was, you know, an order of magnitude off, right? So like I sort of feel like But like, yeah, maybe that's why the DR sort of finds me annoying, is because they kind of think that I'm just going to like bring back the censorship by having a more sort of comedic, satirical element. It just that I feel like there's a way you can do it in a sophisticated way. Like for instance, like if you're sort of like the way I'm philo-Semitic like isn't in a cucky way, and like people who like take me at a very like low resolution filter like don't really realize that, right? Like I think I am actually engaging with the Jewish question in a substantive way that does put pressure on Jews to like deal with questions of like dual loyalty and things like that. But it's like it's in a way that's not hateful, and it's a way that sort of like acknowledges their own perspective. Or it's like the way I did like I talked about like black white issues. Like here's the thing, like I advocated that we give black people reparations, and when you do that, you give yourself rhetorical runway to say like whatever you want, right? And it's a sort of, it's almost like cards you can play. It's like and a lot of right wingers hate thinking this way because they want to like think of the world in a very straightforward way where it's like A is A, like what's true is true, right? But it's not like that's not how things are. It's really more that it's based on like rhetoric and emotion, and like sort of you're able to get away with more, and like in terms of like what can practically be achieved, which is the only framework in which I think it makes sense to talk about politics. It's like you can get away with more if you're willing to make certain concessions in areas you don't care about as much. And I think it sort of behooves us to figure out like what those areas are, because we can get asymmetric returns, and we can actually be very aggressive in certain respects if we buy ourselves that runway.
I think part of it is maybe an age thing, right? Like I think that when you're very young, you are like very interested in like pure ideology. Whilst as you get a little bit older, right? So you're in your late 20s, your early 30s. I think you do get more concerned about practical politics and also just your day-to-day life, right? Which
Right.
a lot of these people, like I think you've said before, like a lot of these people will effectively grow out of these opinions, right? As they get older. Like, for instance, the Civil War. The Civil War is going to happen at any moment now. Like, I don't know, you can't, you know what I mean? You can't really live like that. That's actually quite a disabling
Well,
trait.
it's copium. But the thing is, they're wish casting. They're sort of gaming around collapse because they want it to happen. Because a lot of these guys, and I'm not saying this in a hateful way. You have to understand, because I think like a lot of these guys are incels, but it's just because they're like young, and it's like normal for a guy to be an incel before his like early 20s. Like it's not like 50% of men have always like just like been late bloomers. It's not a big deal, right? But like a lot of, I mean, I was that way, but a lot like I don't know, like I personally stopped caring. I couldn't really be a radical anymore. Like after I got a job that made decent money and I got a girlfriend, because it was just like my life is good. Like why am I like I don't want there to be like a collapse of society. That's actually like bad. And a lot of people will call you like a Jew or something if that's your attitude. But like I don't know, that's just so repulsive to normal people who have resources and who have like a high enough verbal IQ, who have like enough influence in the world to get things done. It just seems to me like a self-defeating impulse, and I don't want to give it any oxygen almost, because it seems just like inherently dumb, right? But I think that like but I think that is like a natural impulse of young men, who, especially the ones who feel like they don't necessarily have a trajectory towards success. And that's why I think that it's sort of incumbent upon guys who are like not even like boomers, because I honestly, like guys, once they hit like 40, 50, like there's only so much they can even like know about what young guys are going through. But guys who are like 30 years old, like you like we need to like mentor young guys and like tell them, okay, here's how you get money, here's how you get women, because it's really only guys in like that the age range like 5 to 10 years older than you who can give you good advice. Because like the moment like even if a guy's like 35 versus 20, I mean the dating, like the women have totally different sensibilities, the completely different worlds, completely different. And like I remember like when like my dad was insistent that I should try to find a wife by like going to college, like loitering on college campuses and talking to undergrads. Like he thought that that was actually like a way that a guy, like a millennial guy, could get like a wife in like 2022 or something. And I'm just like, Dad, that's like the stupidest thing. But the problem is these young guys get terrible advice from their fathers. They don't know how to make money. They don't know how to get women. And I think millennials have sort of abandoned Gen Z guys in kind of a unintentional sort of way. Because I think millennials have main character syndrome, and we're sort of narcissistic, and because of that, there just wasn't that intergenerational amity and mentoring that I think. I mean, I know personally, like I benefited from like a parasocial sort of relationship with like millennial woes and TRS guys and Richard Spencer. I mean, like Richard Spencer like practically taught me how to talk to girls when he seduced Del Reeve or whatever on that famous what was it, like Vox or whatever that famous interview was, right? I mean, like that was so cool and magnetic, and I think that, like we need to do something similar for, because like what do they have? They have like Nick Fuentes, who's like gay, right? I mean, or like Andrew Tate. It's actually quite bad.
I think that you need to have a dialectical view where it's like things actually are bad. They're quite bad in certain areas. But at the same time, like we always sort of project our own mental states onto the world. And if your own life is going badly, it's very easy to project that onto the world. That's not to say that the problems don't exist, because they definitely do. It's just to say that they can take on an intensity that they don't need to have. And like people really do need to think about the practicalities. Like you do need to confront questions of how are you putting food on the table? Like if you're living in a city that is terrible, you need to consider moving, right? It can't just be dwelling on your own misery. And that's what I think a lot of this ends up becoming. It sort of just becomes a place where, what's the expression? Misery loves company. It's just a place where people come together to sort of like ruminate on how bad things have become. And that's not that's just destructive. It's not generative. Like we need to be generative. We need to be culturally generative. We need to be generative in terms of having children. We need to be generative like that. And this whole space
economically too. I mean, like I think part of this has to be like, and this is a thing that I don't know.
Did you say speaking honestly? Is that what you just said?
No, economically.
Oh, economically. Yeah.
We need to get each other, and this is something that I think that like a lot of people in like WASP, ecologies, like they hate talking about money, right? They hate like bringing up like your business, right? Like just talking. Like, and this is something. It's like why are Jews rich? It's because like if you hang out with Jews, you'll see that they'll be like, oh yeah, my cousin's like a lawyer. I could put you in touch with. Oh yeah, I know an accountant. And like that's just like something they or they'll talk about like their side hustle just as part of like a normal conversation. And it's like to a certain extent, like Italians and Greeks and like Serbs, like they'll kind of do the same thing too. But it's like among like Anglos and Germans, they think it's like trashy or gauche or just like bad to do that. And it codes as like well, yeah, I mean people call me like Jewy because I do, but like it's like, look, this is why those other groups are successful, number one, and it's why they're sort of more flexible and they can sort of adapt to a sort of lower trust environment. Whereas I think oftentimes these people from high trust backgrounds, they get shredded when they get into a low trust environment because they're sort of used to all these like implicit ways of doing business in a more like mediated way, or of doing the connections in a more mediated way, that it's just like you can't do that if you're living in a city. You have to be a bit more explicit and transactional with it. And it doesn't mean that everyone's a scumbag. It just means you sort of like I don't know, like to me, this thing where everyone gets called a grifter if they just try to promote their business. It's like what the fuck is the point of a social group if you're not doing that? Like if you're not putting money in each other's pockets. It's like it seems like very dumb. So I guess that's one thing that I've been sort of resistant to about the DR is that there seems to be an extreme hostility towards any kind of commercial activity, which unless it's like selling a T-shirt or something dumb like that. Like it's like that's just like rent seeking. It's like there needs to be something that's mutually like generative. It's like a real like probably like value generating enterprise, but like the people don't have a head for business, and they think you're like a bad person if you do. And it's like I'm not even like temperamentally like that. I'm like an artist by temperament. I just like I went into the business world and I was successful for several years because I had to, and it's like so now I want to bring that to the DR, and I want to sort of like bring that culture in, and I've encountered a lot of hostility.
Yeah, I noticed that there's just this. Before I thought you said speaking honestly, and I felt like that actually was very fitting for what you do, because a lot of the time, you are sort of like, you take like a chainsaw to copium. I think that there's a lot of people who have like their cherished beliefs that basically make poverty seem like a virtue, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I can't even remember the guy that you had a debate with. I think his name was like Barbarian something.
I'm good with Barbarian. Yeah, I feel bad for him. I was too mean to him because I was honestly I'd stayed up for like 3 days. I was on a ton of Adderall. I just like I shredded the guy, and I should have. The thing is, like he and I could have like been nicer to him and got him into my thing, but I just like I Ben Shapiro'd him, and all of his people got mad because it was like a it was kind of a like a squash sort of thing. I feel quite bad about that in retrospect. But yeah,
No, I don't think so. I think he was quite whiny because he kept going Walt.
Oh god, that was horrible. Yeah,
he'd go. He'd pause Walt, and the thing was, it was that was pure slave morality, right? Which was like it was putting up poverty as a virtue. And I'm not saying this as someone who is not rich, right? But seeing poverty as an actual virtue, and it's like it's really not. It's really not. It's not yeah. And I just feel like there's so many things like that where effectively like people are so black pilled, and then they look at anyone doing anything, and effectively they're like, yeah, but Yeah, but in his case, he was saying, yeah, but the petrodollar in yada yada yada. And it's just like, what the fuck? Like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? You know what I mean? Like, um, yeah. So I think it's like a lot of people in these spaces need to be cynical about their own cynicism. That's what I believe. Like, they need to actually look at some of their ideas and some of their cynicism and actually start to be cynical about that. Like, in what ways are these ideas self-serving coping mechanisms that help you deal with the fact that your life is shit? And I'm not saying that his is, but I'm saying for a lot of people that their life is shit, and there are actually a lot of things they can do to change it. And talking on the internet about race and IQ is not one of them.
The thing is, yeah, if you have like a 120 IQ, which a lot of these guys clearly do, like, and if you have like a laptop, like you can, like you have everything you need to get like a remote role as like a data analyst, and maybe eventually a software engineer. Like just like if you do, so I mean, can I get into the Tortuga Society, kind of like talk about like what it is we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So okay. So last year, about halfway through the year, I started an organization. It's a fraternal network. It's a fraternal association. Right now we have 130 members, but we grew very slowly, very deliberately, and it was a thing where I was called a grifter for it a lot, and this sort of it annoyed me more than it should have. Like I should have just been like less insecure about it or whatever. But like I did have this need to sort of like prove myself to the DR and sort of prove that I was coming in good faith. So I mean I put out like so much evidence at this point that it's like not a grift. So at this point I don't care. But basically what we're doing is we are helping guys who, well, there's several different like classes of guys we're helping, right? So I guess I'll start by saying I initially sold it as something to help guys get into job stacking, and what that is working multiple remote jobs simultaneously, so you can draw several salaries, ideally like 6-figure salaries for like tech jobs simultaneously. Now the thing is, like initially we got. And like right now we have like 20 people like that, and we initially got like a fair number of people like that, but the majority of our members have been more guys who have like a liberal arts degree or guys who are like blue collar, who want to get trained in just like the basics of what it takes to get like an email job, right? So that they can like eventually they like the job stack. For a lot of these guys, it's more just like they have like a philosophy or an English degree and they want to get like an $80,000 a year job as a data analyst, so that they can like start to draw in like a better salary, and like they still want to be like an artist or an intellectual in their free time, but it's more they just want higher remuneration as opposed to having like some job at like some bureaucracy where they're making like 40K a year, right? So like that's kind of like the modal member, I would say. And we offer a lot of resources to that end, in terms of I guess massaging your resume to cover, shall we say, gaps in experience. And I'm going to be sort of circumspect with how I talk about this because uh, legal situations and everything. But we offer a lot of resources that can sort of help people to make it so that if you don't have experience, it's not the end of the world. I'll say that much. We also have, like really the main value add is we just have a huge Telegram group of guys who are like really high agency, really insightful. Like if anybody's interested, I have a testimonials thing I just posted. You can go like read about the different resources we have. I won't make this a sales pitch or anything, but I guess like long story short, our long-term goal, well, we have several things. One of the things we want to do is build sort of cultural capital in like people who are more like STEM focused and like train guys who are software engineers or whatever, data analysts in culture, get them more sort of culturally engaged and get them more, because I think there's a lot of people who have like the soul of an artist or a philosopher, but they studied STEM because they had like conservative parents who like pushed them into that. And that's another thing I hate is conservatives are always like, we're losing the culture war, but then it's like you tell your artsy kids to go study business. It's like, fuck you. That's like a huge thing, right? So
well, it's the same as like education, right? It's like if someone expressed interest in like being a teacher, you'd be like, that's fucking gay.
Right,
it's
exactly.
like, well, yeah, it's like, well, no shit. Then what's education going to increasingly resemble? Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, you're totally right, but this is actually a huge structural problem, and it's like but like even like I, as somebody who is more like, I'm super artsy, I'm super like fucking faggoty theater kid, right? But it's like I have that impulse in me to want to make money and be a provider, and like when I'm with a woman, I always want to pay, right? And I even got into like sugar baby sort of dating for a while because I really enjoy that dynamic where I'm always paying for the girl. I think most like right-wing guys feel that way. So even if they are like super artsy or philosophy, whatever, they're going to be the sort of person who wants to go make a lot of money. So it's you have a lot of these guys who like they have the right mental, like cognitive architecture to be a good artist or be a good intellectual, but like they just never went down that path because they just sort of specialized in the sort of vicious status hierarchy. But I don't think, like, I hate this sort of like cognitive ghettoization that we've all kind of went down, this over specialization. And they tried to fight this with like interdisciplinary studies, but it never works. But it's like this idea that you're like a math person or a writing person. It's like, I don't know, like I was an actuary, which is a very mathy job, but it's like I'm clearly a word cell, right? So it's like I don't think a person has to like be one or the other. It's like I think that it behooves everybody to learn. Like I'm not like saying that everybody has to be totally well rounded. We can have our specialties, but it's like I think if you're a high IQ person, like you can be capable in both, and most people are just kind of like lazy at the thing that they like less.
It's sort of like physical fitness and intelligence, how like there was this sort of nerdy view of the world that like you gained one at the expense of the other. If you had brains, you didn't have brawn. And that's actually one of the things that I think that the DR sort of dispelled, was like there's people like Mishima and all of these other characters who, were both intellectual and physical, and you can actually be both. And I guess like what you're saying is, in the same way you can be both financially competent and artistic. It's not like the two are mutually exclusive.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
didn't Voltaire run like a massive estate at the end of his life? And like, I seem to recall that like he actually basically became like a businessman at the end of his life, running like a large estate. But anyway.
No, I mean, that totally makes sense. I could see that. I mean, I think a lot of those guys, I think even, what was his name? Wasn't like Newton involved in the treasury? I don't know. Like one of those guys was. Yeah, I mean, I guess like the way I see it is, it just sort of behooves you to like have that sort of capability in both realms, especially as a man. I think it's just something that like, you need to be competent. And yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to, but like we're also trying to encourage like artsy people to learn more about like math, right? Because like there's no reason like, like someone who like, the more you study philosophy, I mean, the more it resembles math. Like at the highest levels of both, they sort of converge, right? So, like I think that's important. I think it's also just important to I want to build a network of sort of mid-sized patrons, like a fundraising network for, I don't want to call it right-wing art. That's kind of, like I don't view art as that didactic, but it's like, I want to be able to fund artists who I just personally know, who have like a good idea for a movie or whatever, but they just have a hard time raising funds. That to me is extremely important, because right now the fundraising thing that we currently have, it's either you go to Peter Thiel for like $1 million and hope he funds you, or you just ask everybody and their grandma for $5, which just looks trashy as hell. Like, why can't we be? It's like on the left, they have all these effective altruists, like programmers who make 400 grand a year, who just give 10 grand for like shrimp or like malaria nets or whatever. I mean, like all these stupid causes. Like, why can't we? Like I want to build my own fundraising classes roughly comparable to that, so that we can like amass resources towards similar ends. But then there's all sorts of things you can do once you get a bunch of guys making money in a similar sort of network like Tortuga. So like you could do like gentrification networks. You have a bunch of guys like buy up homes. Right. If you have a bunch of software engineers buying up homes in the ghetto, you put just like normal guys in the movement and they're holding down space. And then in a few years, you sell them all to like gays or Mexicans to, make a nice sum of money. There's like a lot of different like little things you can do like that. I mean, like Hasidic Jews and stuff are already doing that in upstate New York. Like there's no reason we can just like base it on the current models of what people are doing. I think we need to be creative. And I think that there's a certain opposition. Like there's almost an idea that like, oh, like we just need like, JD Vance to become president and like kill everybody or something. Like I think that like a lot of center right people is like really just they're sort of like thinking purely around that, or they're collapsitarians and they're like, okay, like we're just gonna wait until like Russia's gonna. That's what that uncouth barbarian guy was saying, is that like Russia's gonna dominate the world because they have a commodity based economy, because he didn't understand how like value add works. And I mean it's embarrassing, but yeah, I mean I guess my thing is I just sort of view, we need to just get resources, get power, get the ability to sort of like be upwardly mobile in society. And I want to help people in the DR and adjacent spaces just get to that point.
I think I can explain why they called you a grifter. And I think it's because people on the far right, they often have a sort of aristocratic sensibility. And if you look at it, like there's always been a tension between aristocracy and the merchant class, right? That's a historic struggle that's occurred. It occurred in England during, the Civil War. It occurred in France during the Revolution. It occurred, I guess, even in America. The royal landed gentry against the merchant class. The landed gentry is like, we're going to tax you because we have all the political power. You might have the economic power, but we have the political power. And then the merchant class has been like, no, fuck you. We're not putting up with that. And the thing is, I like aristocratic cultures. I do. I think that like they're superior for cultural production. I think it's difficult to argue against that. But at the same time, I think it needs to be recognized that merchant power for the past 500 years has been winning. Like naval merchant power has repeatedly beaten that sort of landed gentry. And I mean, it's all laughing to even talk about this because we don't have an aristocracy anymore. But you know what I'm saying is they sort of have this view that it's like, it's dishonorable to want to make money. Well, it's like, cool. If you think like that, you'll never have any power. You'll never be able to exert any political power. So I think that it's recognizing that actually, as well as merchants, I understand why people don't like them. I understand why some people feel like it's sterile or whatever, but there are alternative models. Like you look at Athenian democracy. I mean, that was fueled by merchant power. That had that led to the golden age. Same with Elizabethan England and other places. So I don't know. I think
here's a hot take for you. Like the reason people don't like them, like that's like why they're rich, right? Is they deserve to be rich because they're putting up with people hating them, and that's like sort of the value they're providing. Is they're being the assholes who will actually tell somebody, "Hey, get back to work," because really, like that's one of like the most valuable things in society is somebody to actually just kind of enforce human agency and make people, hold people accountable. Because I think there's kind of a tendency to just have entropy, and anything that fights back against entropy is, to my mind, sort of pro-civilizational. I guess what I'll say to you though is I feel like a lot of people, they'll venerate Prussia, for instance, right? Why is it that Prussia was able to, have that sort of model? It was because it was being subsidized by England. Right? Like that's the only reason it could hold off France and Russia and Austria all those years. And then even before that, the Austrian, the Habsburg court, which was like, it famously dispensed all this largesse to like Mozart and everything. I mean, they were allied with the English and they received subsidies from Britain because like you need, like everybody has like some Jew backing them at the end of the day. I mean, like you need value generation. Like you need some sort of like wealth generating enterprise to back any sort of aristocratic enterprise, right? And there's a contempt though for that engine that fuels everything because it is grimy, it is messy, and there's a sort of desire to mediate things, and there's a desire to. I think part of the problem is like if you look in like Indian society, you had the Vaishya caste or the Kshatriya class, I guess it's called, sort of like mediating between the Brahmins and the Vaishyas, who have like sort of like oppositional instincts, but he sort of like respected both. At least this is what my friend who's like all into Hinduism tells me. This could be totally made up, but this is what I trust the guy, so I think his take is probably good. But I think that in Western society, the sort of Brahminical impulse gets sort of like merged with. It's almost like you have the aristocrat versus the merchant, and then there's like the peasant. But I almost feel like the clergy was sort of like it might have just like sided uncomplicatedly with the aristocrats, like against the merchant. Whereas I feel like in other civilizations you might have had like a more sort of complex sort of thing. I mean, I don't know. Like maybe at the end of the day, just the merchant kind of won out in most of like North European societies. So
this is actually a point of contention that I might have with you is over lumping together WASPs and Germans, because I actually do feel like there are quite significant differences. I mean, even within Germany and within England. But I was going to say, like, the WASP really is a mercurial figure, is he not? Like perhaps the greatest of all mercurial figures in a way, because like these sort of these trade networks that we established. I mean, like free trade, global free trade. Who do you have to thank for that? It's the WASP. So like I feel like
it's an ethnic rivalry. It's because I'm Celtic. I think it's more. I dislike how what I dislike about WASP is that they cover up. No, you know what it is that you're absolutely right. There is a huge difference between WASP and Germans, but they sort of act similar. But underneath
in terms of mannerism, certainly, yeah. I can see in terms of mannerisms that there's more similarity. But even there's a rigidity within Germany which is foreign to WASPs. So if you go to Germany till this day, like when I was in Hamburg or whatever a couple of years ago, and like jaywalking. Right? Like these people will not cross the road unless the light is green. And you can tell there's a rigidity there that, like, I think Spengler said it was like the Germans are like knights. You know what I mean? And that's very fitting because I think Prussia started as like, literally a group of knights who had a state. And the English are like Vikings. You know what I mean? And I think that he basically saw the Germans being all about duty, honor, all of these things that you associate with them, whilst the British like the Viking kind of character was more about like it was actually about money. You know what I mean? Like that's how Spengler saw it. Like
Right.
that was his German scorn for the WASP was basically like how a lot of people view Jews, where it's like they just care about commerce and finance. They have no higher notions. And he was this is in his essay on Prussian socialism and why socialism, was very fitting for Prussia. So anyway, yeah, sorry for the
Right.
interruption.
No, that's actually really fascinating to me because, okay, here's what I would submit to you is that the Anglo is a Jew inside and a German on the outside,
Mm.
right? He's a very mercurial, very sort of money focused on the inside, but on the outside he's stoic. He has a very calm deportment. He he has a stiff upper lip, and he looks down on like I think the WASPs historically look down on the Jews because Jews are very emotionally expressive, right? And that was a major point of contention, and that's why I identify with Jews over WASP because the Celts are also very emotionally expressive. Whereas I would say that yeah, it's interesting. I never really. I guess the thing is, I sort of like focus a lot on outward behavior, but I guess I'm not necessarily thinking about like what the interior differences are between these different groups. And because I think that, for instance, I think that like Celts and Jews are oftentimes very, very externally similar, but probably on the inside very different. In the same way that Germans and Anglos are. Um,
Yeah, I think for sure. I think even within Germany, right, like some of these free states would have been very mercurial. But yeah, I do think that I've actually found, having learned about my own history, right, like I did this huge deep dive, super autistic 10-hour history of the discovery of Australia. And what I realized is like without merchants, merchants really did discover this nation to a huge extent, like whalers, and these were the people who settled it. Like it wasn't settled by, knights and all the rest of it. It was settled by people trying to make money, basically,
right.
pastoralists, like all very mercurial figures. And yeah, basically my contention is that like as a WASP, I actually am sympathetic towards mercurialism and Mercury and Hermes, and
Mhm.
but then you notice because of these spaces, there's such a veneration of Germany because a lot of these people are actually Nazis. Like it becomes the veneration of the knight, doing his duty, yada yada yada, like that sort of yeah, not to ridicule it, but I so that's my point of contention. I view that as very distinct, but I can see the stoicism. Like I think about my grandfather because I am a WASP, and
Mhm.
my sort of like my grandfather, for instance, who was, for what it's worth, a mercurial man, a very very wealthy man, but he had exactly what you're talking about, stiff upper lip. He considered it like almost he would consider it like almost like a little bit self-indulgent to even talk about yourself. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
uh,
It
yeah,
is.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. And yeah, so
well,
but
here's the thing. Like, I think that the WASP like objectively creates the best institutions. Like, I would never deny that. I mean, if we just look at like the British Empire was objectively just like the best like empire to ever exist, right? Like, I think that's pretty obvious. But I think that the WASP is his institutions are very vulnerable to being taken over by Jews and Celts. Because I think emotionally expressive people are better at manipulating people within the waters and sort of playing different groups against each other and sort of like, playing the victim strategically. It's like both Jews and Irish will like act like they're victim. I mean, like, they'll bring up shit from like 100 years ago. It's like, who cares? Right. But it's like, that's something that, yeah, like WASP would never really do that. Right. But I think that but in terms of like forming the superstructure, the Anglo is better than anybody because yeah, the stiff upper lip is just objectively especially like when you're just like the guy, my right hand man in Tortuga, Fian, is a WASP, and like he's a great COO because he doesn't like let stupid bullshit in his day. Like if he's having like if he has like a fight with his girlfriend or if he like stubs his toe or something, he's not going to let it like hurt his work performance. Whereas like for me, I absolutely will. Like I'll be so fucking self indulgent, and that's like it's a very sort of Irish thing to just be like, yeah, fuck this. I'm just gonna like completely but then it's like you're also like very sort of creative on the upside, and like you can also sort of get these fits of inspiration. Why it's why a lot of the greatest poets in I mean even England are of like Irish heritage. So I mean I think you have these like trade-offs, right? It's like when you indulge a certain inclination in a temperament, then it can like I think like the German temperament was like very great for like warfare in the age of mass armaments and industry. But I think it's like very bad for, well, I mean, like I guess there's like a lot of very specific things that we could get into, with all these different temperaments. But I guess what I'd say is it's always a trade-off.
Well, yeah, I was reading a book by Alan Moorhead, and it was on Burke, who was, I believe, yeah, he was Irish, right? But he was a pioneer in Australia, pioneering explorer. I believe, fuck, I should know this, but I believe that he was like one of the first people to actually go into the interior, like, that sort of like desert, unforgiving land. And he actually began that book by remarking on how unusual it was for an Irishman to be like an accomplished explorer. And he began to speculate about character. And basically his thesis was that the Irishman was just too impulsive to go on these, the same thing that makes him a good poet is what makes him a bad explorer, basically. He was too emotional and impulsive. Because obviously with exploration, like people like Cook, these guys are like, it's not just like adventurousness, right? It's also like crazy forward planning. You need to think of a gazillion different contingencies. And you also do need a real stoicism, because it's like, if you're going, like in the case of Cook, if it's like, hey, we're going to go and sail to Antarctica in a wooden boat roughly the size of a tennis court, like, you're going to have to keep your emotions in check. You know what I mean? Because
it's just sort of weird, because like the Portuguese were the ones who started that, right? And I think of like the Portuguese and the Spanish as very sort of impulsive. And I guess the thing is when you have like the more scientific kind of, it's interesting. It's like the Mediterranean's kind of dominated the world and exploration, certainly for the first years of like the Renaissance and like the Baroque period. But then it's like power shifted northward, and there's all these other economic and geopolitical reasons for that, right? But it's like, I think part of it is probably that the more methodical Northern European temperament is just going to have a greater advantage when you have a more technologically sophisticated civilization, whereas that more impulsive.
Sorry, here's a little funny aside though. Henry the Navigator, who is the person who begins the age of exploration, was actually half English, for what it's worth. So his mum was English. And again, like if you look at his biographies, when they speak about it, they do make a point of the fact that he did have a sort of English piousness and a very English temperament. He basically was an incel, right? Like he locked himself up in a tower and basically just dedicated his whole life to like studying maps. You know what I mean? Like an autistic incel. So he's not what you think of when you think of a typical Portuguese guy, and genetically he's not even a typical Portuguese guy. But yeah, I think that this is maybe loosely relevant to like what something else we wanted to talk about was, it's because we're talking about sort of you often evoke Faust, right? You say that that European man is defined by the Faustian spirit. And I actually 100% agree with you there. But I think that the age we're living in now is not Faustian. It's actually more mercurial. And the reason I think that is I believe that like there's a good book that you should 100% read if you get a chance. It's called The Jewish Century, actually written by a Michelin guy. And basically his contention was like, if you look at the way the world works now, everything's transactional, everything's lucid. It's not about like setting down roots, starting a farm. It's about exploiting asymmetries. It's about arbitrage. It's about, and basically he makes the point that like, we're all exiles now because none of us have a home per se. Modernity is about like being able to move, being mobile. And he basically makes the point like nobody is more mobile than Jewish people. Like basically they have been like modernity, the modern economy is basically the service industry. And basically Jews have been in the service industry for like 2,000 years. They've been servicing like as lawyers, as doctors, as bankers. They've been doing that for 2,000 years. And the fact is that a lot of Europeans, until quite recently, were farmers. And we're having to suddenly adopt to this new economy. And it's clear that Jews are very well adapted to the modern world. So in some ways, like this explanation is interesting because it's clearly not anti-Semitic, right? Because he himself is a Michelin. He's just saying that modern conditions are very, very advantageous to Jewish people. And basically, I think you should describe yourself as mercurial. That's my contention.
See, I guess one interesting thing is I don't know if you watched the debate I had with Norman Eckert.
Yeah,
But
I did watch that. I listened to that. I thought that he's a very he made some very good points on that, and it was a very good debate.
it was interesting though because he said that what I was calling the Faustian spirit, he would call the spirit of Mephistopheles, whereas I think of them as one and the same. And I think it's because I have a sort of naturally pagan ethos where I think of good and evil as existing in parallel. And I don't think like it goes back to that whole like Marilyn Monroe quote, like if you don't love me in my if you can't handle me in my worst, you don't deserve me in my best or whatever. Which is like we all sort of roll our eyes at that. I think of it as kind of like a cringe like BPD girl Reddit thing, but it's like it actually speaks to something very real, which is that like everything you sort of hate about somebody is going to be just like the shadow of something you might admire about them, right? I mean, like whether it's a friend or a significant other or whatever. I mean, it tends to all sort of go hand in hand, and I think that the Faustian spirit is it's a desire to like stick your hand in the cookie jar, right? Which is it's like the desire to like always be pushing boundaries and always be wanting to explore further, which goes into temptation and which goes into like wanting to. It's like that impulse will have to it's like like all these like teenage girls who love watching like true crime documentaries and like fantasizing about being like tortured and stuff. I mean, like why? I think that's like very much a white girl thing. I don't know if like black girls necessarily do that, right? Or it's like like the creepypasta, or like I think we have like a there's a certain fascination with the macabre. Or a fascination with like black people will say like, man, white people crazy, they climbing Mount Everest. I mean, it's just like doing these things. It's like, why would you do this? Right. I mean, it's pushing the frontiers, pushing the limits. Now, I think that there's an impulse in people who are more like Norma is somebody who's very high openness, and like you obviously are too. But I don't know what your religious background is, but like I feel like among people who are more maybe Christian or who maybe come from a more Christian family, I feel like oftentimes there's a more Nietzschean sort of impulse to want to like say good and evil are like separate things and to like sort of like cordon them off. And I think that like oftentimes a lot of white nationalists have an impulse to want to say like, okay, this is like Jewish and this is Aryan. But when it's like, I don't know, like I think of them as oftentimes kind of very similar. I mean, like the Jews invented psychoanalysis. They did, like Norm was talking about how like whites have this proclivity to like, explore within our own psyche. And it's like, I mean, who does that more than Jews? Right. So I guess that's kind of where I was digging at.
Well, but I wasn't making a moral point. That's the thing is I wasn't saying good or evil. I actually admire mercurial figures. Like, so
Right.
I'm not, yeah. And I admire, for what it's worth, I actually really admire Jewish people as well. Some of my closest friends, two of my closest friends, and I'm talking now 15 plus years, are Jewish. So, and get this, right? How funny is this? How stereotypical is this? One of them, his dad was in the textile industry. The other was his mom was a psychoanalyst. So anyway,
oh wow,
yeah, so stereotypical. But
well, let me ask you, like, how would you characterize the Faustian spirit, like in comparison, then? Because I like don't get what the Faustian spirit is if it's not sort of like as you're calling it mercurial.
No. So I think the two things are loosely related, that they're very similar archetypes. But the distinction I make is that I see the Faustian spirit as a desire for limitless space. So Spengler, so like the symbol that Spengler associated Faustian civilization with was the cathedral. And the reason being is that within a cathedral, there's limitless space, right? And that there's something about Faustian man that drives him to the plain or to the open space or to the mountain. So the example that people, well, you sort of just gave it then with your joke that, British people, they would go to Nepal and, the people had been dwelling in valleys for all of their existence. They'd been there for thousands of years. And then these crazy Anglos or Germans or whatever would be like, we are going to climb that mountain, right? And the natural response to that is, you're fucking crazy. Why are you going to do that? You're not going to, there's no financial gain, right? You're not going to earn any money. You're going to go up this mountain for what? And I think that the what is that limitless space. So there's something that, this is what I try to get at with the Faustian thing. I think there is something almost anti-utilitarian about the Faustian spirit. It's, maybe you could say like a macabre curiosity. Whilst I see Mercury as much more utilitarian, but Mercury is also about, like, he literally is Hermes, I think, which is the Greek equivalent of Mercury. I believe that he's the boundary crosser, right? And they would put these symbols of Hermes at the boundaries because Hermes would cross those boundaries. And
I think
So
that's what it is for me more than anything else is about is like a contempt for boundaries qua boundaries. And I think that for me, it's also about the whole idea of making the bargain with Mephistopheles in and of itself is what's important because the way I see it, I look at all these different things I've done in life, all these asymmetric strategies that I've sort of utilized, whether it's like dropping out of high school and doing like cheating my way through an online program to start college when I was, very young, whether it's job stacking, whether it's dating all these BPD art ho girls through like sugar baby stuff, whether it's, becoming an internet celebrity, whatever I'm doing now, like all of this shit is, it's very like not normal, but it also like it has certain extreme upsides, but then it's also like there's also certain downsides that other people can't even help you navigate. So it feels like you're making a deal with the devil in a sense. And I feel like my life has always sort of been kind of defined by making these bargains. And it's all oftentimes that I'll get out of one bargain, I'll escape one Mephistopheles by making a deal with another. And I guess like the way I see it is like the best sort of white man is the one who's always kind of living on the seat of his pants, kind of like flying from one sort of situation like that to another. But I mean, I guess that might just be me sort of like narcissistically projecting my own experience onto the race as a whole, because I think there's an extent to which I just don't identify with maybe the more studied, the more deliberate, the more careful sort of, impulse that you're describing, which probably is necessary to do something like climb Mount Everest. Like I probably would not have the discipline to do something like that because it probably would just take a lot of consistent action and a lot of planning towards a certain end. And I'd probably end up like freezing or something because I wouldn't take the right precautions, right? So it's like, but it's like oftentimes these asymmetric strategies they're often kind of case selected, right? In the sense that they're about adapting to the current ecology and figuring out the most like the biggest way to use leverage to like situationally take advantage of something. It's like the hunter impulse as opposed to the farmer, right?
yeah,
So I don't know. Does that make sense?
that does make sense. And I think like the great trouble of our time is that like, yeah, there's just this randomness to the modern economy, which is like if you have a farmer brain, it's you're going to get cooked often.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do kind of want to keep harping on this point because I actually think there is a subtle yet significant difference between Faust and Mercury, and I think. At least according to Spengler, because I actually feel like the great problem for European man in the current year is the fact that space is controlled and owned. That Faustian man was so successful in his pursuit to dominate space that he basically gave himself no more space, right? And that's why actually I think that a lot of like if you look at the groups that are doing well are the mercurial groups. So it's like the Italian diaspora. You know what I mean? Like people
Right.
who it is Jewish people, it's Armenians. These are the people who are doing really well. Whilst I actually feel like if you took a guy like Vasco da Gama, it sounds, maybe you'll disagree with me here. I would not be surprised if Vasco da Gama was not flourishing in the current year. And the same is like even maybe someone like Captain Cook, is I feel like unless we get space travel happening soon, that archetype is dead. You know what I mean? I think that archetype can only come back to life really in its full form when it's about literal space. You know what I mean? Literally conquering space.
You know what? This is really interesting to me because I think this is something like this is very rare that I have somebody who actually just like on the spot like changes my mind about something. But I think you actually have. I think the thing that my blind spot is I'm so disembodied that I just like don't think about the physical world at all, and I almost have a contempt for physical space, and that's why I'm very sort of Jew coded in a lot of my. But I think about I had a friend of mine in Nebraska who, now that I think about it, he was quite Faustian as you describe it. But I think I like he was a farm kid. And I think he, really into like Bitcoin and stuff. But I think he has that like I think there's a lot of people who, it's like the fact that software engineering is dominant and like mechanical engineering is sort of like, like there used to be this impulse of like, oh, we're going to build robots. Right. But like that isn't as big anymore. And there was this impulse of like, we're going to like colonize the galaxy. And like, I think there's a certain type of guy who would get like very high openness and very creative and very sort of like, I have a guy in my community, Tom Swift, is a lot like this. And he wants to sort of bring this impulse back, sort of get people more physically embodied, like higher openness people physically embodied. And I mean, I think that guy is kind of screwed over. I see what you mean. I think that I do think I think there's a very kind of German kind of creativity and probably WASP too. That is like really fucked over, and it sort of makes Germans more sort of like autistic and mean-minded when they're sort of denied that ability to like explore things, to climb the Alps or to like go sail the seas. It turns them into like these caricatures, these hobbits, that they, they're not the best versions of themselves, and it is actually quite cruel. And in a sense, I'm sort of like not seeing that in a sort of unempathetic way because I'm such a fucking neckbeard. So like are you an outdoorsman by any chance? You strike me as somebody who might be like an adventurist.
Yeah. I am. It's one of my hobbies. So like I used to live in the Australian Alps, which is something most people don't know about. But yeah, I live, when I say live, I mean like in the foothills. And what I would do is in like wintertime by myself, I would just like this for me, it's sort of scratch that itch, which I believe that is characteristic of the wasp. But I would go out with my backpack, climb up mountains, like complete whiteouts, and go and stay in like these little huts, like back in the day, the cattlemen built huts that you can go and stay in. So yeah, no, I am an outdoorsman, and I believe that is a characteristic feature of our culture, which yeah, it is yeah, and even there, dude, one of the most black pilling things is in Australia, right? Huge sections of national parks are becoming no-go zones because they're getting claimed, there'll be like a little rock cave painting or something. And it's like, yeah, this is a heritage site. You can't go here. Even worse, right? They go and put in these $1 million projects where they turn like a natural landscape into like, they build like steel stairs that are totally like up to health and safety regulations. And even like I was walking not long ago, right? I'm in a park, and basically I never walk on the tracks. I'm always off. Dude, I got full on fined by rangers for not walking on a track. So you see how it's like that one, it's like this one little place of like that one little last place of wilderness, right? Where they try to even regulate that. And I think that sort of frontiersman spirit, yeah,
but that comes from the WASP culture too, right? Because I feel like WASP are very big on rules and like sort of like defining a like they're it's not even that they're like very like litigious per se, but they want to create like a legal incentive structure that's like formalist in a way that like will incentivize good behavior, and that's what makes WASP so good building institutions, is that they're very big on like rules being followed. But
I think I know this paradox. I think I've got this paradox, right? Is that basically the WASP flourishes imposing order on chaos, right? That's what the WASP wants to do. The WASP is at his best when he's in a chaotic environment and he is set the task of imposing order on chaos, on wilderness. But what happens is once the wilderness is conquered, he begins to basically just start to continue that instinct continues, that conquering instinct continues to the point where the smallest parts of your life are getting regulated. You know what I mean? So it's like he almost can't put aside that frontiersman attitude where it's like all chaos, all nature must be subsumed and controlled. And yeah, I it's basically like a corruption, or like yeah, you know what I mean? Like a corruption of that WASP virtue, or like exactly what you say, like you can't have the rose without the thorn. Like that's pretty much it. Is that he flourishes when he's imposing order, and once he's imposed order, he continues to do that, and that's the thorn, I guess.
There's also sort of I think a problem that a lot of it kind of makes me think about tensions in DR spaces that I've had with maybe they were Germans and not WASP, but if they were WASP, I could see it as the WASP might get very annoyed when they're dealing with like Jews or Irish or Italians who are just a bit more chaotic, or who do sort of like, who sort of manipulate rules, or who sort of like dance between them. And like, there's a sort of, like when you don't have that boundary to explore, when you're not off like conquering the Indian, and when you're not off like settling the prairie, you're going to have to, like it's almost like that impulse is going to be drawn towards like curtailing people who you perceive as like rule breakers, or chaotic within the current ecology, and that might actually create like needless ethnic strife, right? Which like otherwise wouldn't exist, because everyone would sort of just be in their own niche, right? So I think that yeah, I mean, I think that like Mars colonization would be great for the WASP. That's what he needs, really. That's what a lot of these guys these hobbits would be like. The Nebraskan prairie hobbit would probably be like self-actualized. They'd all want to be like building rockets and shit if we could go there. Because if you think back to like the 50s, like think about that. This is something I was thinking about. Like in the Midwest, there was a tradition of like grassroots intellectualism in like the 50s, like in the 60s, because of like the space race. right? And there were like plenty of like dads who would like read like Scientific American, and they would like know about like physics and stuff, and like just normal guys. Whereas like these days, the Midwest is like one of the least intellectual parts of the country, and I think that like part of that probably is because he needs that animating like NASA sort of energy to like want to be high openness in a sense. Like I think that's what creates high openness in the WASP.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. Hey, going to the Hobbit thing. Actually, I was meant to say this before, and this is a little bit of a digression, but I actually live in the country, right? And I was, and I don't consider myself a Hobbit, and I do actually see why you have contempt for the Hobbit. But I did kind of want to point out that there is ulterior reasons why someone might leave the city, and this is me talking to someone listening who might be in an urban center who's very disillusioned with modern life. I actually do think that leaving the city can be a great thing, but you need to be smart where you move. You don't want to move to prairie land, basically. You want to move to a place which has a sort of romantic quality, which is a way of saying wild nature. If you can live, and also it's just a form of geographic arbitrage, which I know you're a fan of, Walt. Like,
Yeah.
like if you can get a credential, find some sort of job that pays you the same regardless of location, and then you live in a place like this is one of the best things, personally. Like I've done it, and I believe like it's one of the best things that I've done simply because now I have a quality of life that's way higher than I would have if I was in the city, right?
Well, you already had a girl, right?
Yeah. So that is actually probably a necessary caveat to
No,
that.
I 100% agree with you. Like, if you have a girl, I mean, like, yeah, like absolutely. It's, it's just that it's very hard to find quality women if you're not in a city as a single guy. That's like literally all it is, really.
Yeah, and
I
so
mean,
you,
it's not that I like love, it's not like I'm going out and playing beer pong with or I'm going to like barcades or, it's like, it's that's really the only reason you live in the city.
oh, and that's also another thing, right? Is that my point was that as a high openness person, the country is increasingly attractive. Like there's never been a better time to be an urbane provincial because it's like
Mm-hmm.
you have access to the internet. You have like I'm having a conversation with you now. I listen to your stuff. I have access to everything I could possibly need in that regard. So it does scratch that itch, at least for me. Like when I was in the city, that itch was not getting scratched. When I joined Twitter, which happened to be when I had moved away from the city, like I was suddenly able to scratch that itch. Now it's not perfect. Ideally, we'd all be doing this in person, and it would lead to much more strong bonds and connections. But yeah, my point is that like a lot of the stuff you hear about the country, it's sort of like outdated, or even just like a provincial city. It's like, yeah, that was true 20 years ago, right? That it's like boring or whatever. But increasingly, that just isn't the case, right? Like you're not disconnected. You're well and truly connected. Like the city is everywhere. So yeah, I just wanted to say that because I do think that for a lot of people, it could be something that dramatically increases their quality of life.
Oh yeah, I fully agree. I do just think that the single man and the coupled man's like attitudes are just totally like there's just all these little like things, right, that add up in terms of like how you're gonna be making like various trade-offs in terms of how much space you want. In terms of like whenever I've had a long-term girlfriend and she's like I've tried to have her like move into my apartment, it's like it's hell. It's like there's no way I can make that work, right? Like in a high rise. Whereas it will be kind of nice to have like a plot of land under those conditions. So I mean, I guess it's just like it sort of just changes your calculus. I'd say another thing is at least for me, I find that I think I actually am sort of soothed by there being a certain amount of noise around me. And like having a certain like high cortisol level. Like I sort of like going outside and having a bunch of like anonymous like sort of brown people like around me because it sort of makes me feel like I'm lost in a crowd. Like I'm sort of it probably is that disembodied like sort of like Michelin coded aspect of my personality, right? Whereas like probably for you, like you probably don't really have that impulse as much.
It's funny though, because I do actually love walking around cities because I obviously lived in the city for a long time, and I love city walks because I do find there's something really fun about it. And I've been like the thing is I like the city. I consider myself a cosmopolitan person, despite the fact that I live in the country in the middle of fucking nowhere. But
Yeah.
I do consider myself a cosmopolitan person nonetheless, and I love going to the city. But I just, for me, generally, like you said, I find that I prefer having like it lowers my cortisol. I notice that when I'm in an urban center for a long time, I do start to get like very neurotic. And I think that I'm someone who almost needs to be in like a calmer environment because I am myself, like I'm quite chaotic. I'm not like a stoic sort of person. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
it's almost like for me, it's like has a soothing effect. You know what I mean? Being in yeah. And I also like routines. It's funny. Like I am novelty seeking, but I do also like having a bit of a routine on a day-to-day basis. So not because I'm rigid, but because I find that without it, I become too chaotic, basically.
Yeah. I honestly, I mean, I'm probably suffering from the same thing, and I just like I'm in denial about it, or I'm just like not, doing what I need to. I do think my life has been like happier when I've tried to impose a routine on myself. I think the problem is it's like I've sort of like reached the point where I just don't. Um, I don't know. Like I think in the past, like I had a routine because I had to have one, and at this point, I no longer like have to have one. And like in a sense, that's sort of like like I won't like choose to have one, even though I like should, because my life would be better. But it's almost like I don't have the discipline to do something unless I'm like being forced to. So it's like I think that's probably just a personality like a defect on my part. But I definitely understand what you mean. I mean it is just like having good habits. I mean having a stable sleep cycle, all these things, they just improve your mood in so many different like little intangible ways.
Well, I think that one of the things that I've loved about your stuff is your emphasis on like motivated reasoning and just recognizing that like we all have this tendency to sort of like look at our own lives and effectively like come up with reasons why this is how you should live effectively. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and I look at my life and I recognize that it's very, very, it works for me. I do not think it would work for the majority of people, but it's the same as you, right? Like the way you live your life, there's probably things about it that you can and will change, but like yeah, that's yeah,
well, I mean, it's sort of another thing is that I sort of just feel like I've sort of learned over the past year as I've tried to give other younger guys advice or whatever. It's like I think a lot of my stuff is just so hyper specific that I don't even know how mappable it is to others. So that's what sort of made me kind of think down this route, is like to what extent are all these temperamental differences just intractable, and we all sort of just kind of have this like animus towards other people who have the temperamental differences from ourselves because we just can't understand their interiority and we don't want to. And that's kind of the most horrifying possibility, I think.
Well, and that's why I think a degree of pluralism is good. Like you need to recognize different strokes for different folks. Like we do need to do things differently based on who we are. But I just realized, I just saw the time. I think so. Now we've been almost talking when you include our pre-talk, it's almost been 2 hours. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer. But this has been great. I've actually really loved to. I feel like I didn't even touch on a lot of the things I wanted to. But would you be open to doing another conversation?
Yeah, but let me invite you on my pod. We'll do that in like a month or something. How about that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that instead. That sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
Wait, this has been great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Walt.
Yeah, likewise, man. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Yeah.